Hi everybody, I'm Jason Flood. I'm a CTO in IBM's Security Division. I'm here today to talk to you about how we could supercharge SecOps through the use of a unified analyst experience and generative AI. Now, I've mentioned a couple of terms there, and I'm conscious that when we come to these events, security is very broad now, and I want to make sure that we can bring as many people with us through this complex area. So I just wanted to define some of those terms here. So when I talk about SecOps, what I mean is, think of it like City Hall. This is the area in which you do your coordination, your orchestration, your organization, everything goes through your business. It happens in here. When I talk about an analyst, I want you to manage the analyst as the fireman, the policeman, the doctor, the people who keep you safe, the people who protect you, the people who fix you when you get a bump. They're the analysts. And then generative AI. I'm going to give you a very simple definition of generative AI now. And generative AI, if you can imagine, is if I have two pieces of data with generative AI, I can potentially make a third piece of data which is as valuable as the first two. Now, that's a very simple definition. I'm not going to cover more than that. There's a lot going on in generative AI, and it's outside the scope of this. So I just wanted to give you some idea of what we're talking about. So when we talk about supercharging, why do we need to supercharge it? What is the problem? What is that the SecOps team are facing today? Well, these are some scary numbers I've just put on screen. Imagine we've gone from a space, so imagine SecOps. You've got an analyst, he's looking at screens. They're looking at flows of data. They're looking at all this attack traffic. If you've ever been in a SecOps, it's sometimes called a SOC, a Secure Operations Center. If you ever saw it, you'd see lots and lots of screens. And in that screen, you might have 10, 12, 13 people, who knows, working away, watching those screens. And on those screens, lots of activities are happening. Previously, it used to take 49 days. So that's a huge window to spot things that are happening in the system, down to just 1 hour. Like, this is blink and you miss it kind of stuff. So we've got analysts who are under tremendous pressure, very stressful role, and now attackers can do stuff at a much higher rate. We've also got 68 days window down to 4 days for ransomware. That is incredibly scary stuff. So how can we move past this? How can we get to watch more? So when we look at what systems we're deploying, if we go back to 2019, we see 8% of endpoints recovered. We were monitoring some of the solutions. And as we grow, we've 36% now. And what this type of trend shows is we're watching more. But the question is, are we watching more but seeing less? Are we now in a place where our analysts are looking for needles and stacks of needles, which is really, really interesting. Even though the attack speed has gone up, our time to recover has stayed pretty long. So it's still about 270 days. And what's really, really interesting and really quite scary as well is often it's the case that when you do detect an attack, it didn't come from your team, you were told. So we've got this huge pressure point building up inside of our SOC, inside of our Security Operations Center for our analysts. And what we need to do is we need to make that better. So what are the problems? How does it work? And this is where I think through this unified analyst experience that we'll speak to, we can make it. So currently, in our current SecOps model, everything is kind of technology focused. It's about getting the tools in, it's about wiring them up, it's about doing all that stuff. And really it needs to be less about the tools and more about the analysts. We need to change focus. We need to make their life easier to use those tools. It needs to be less about heroes and rock stars. And I see this, and you probably know them in your own organization. You walk around and you know the go-to person if you've got an issue. That's great, but the problem with that is it doesn't scale. With generative AI and AI in general, what we can hopefully do is tap into those experts, capture them as models, and then help to leverage that skill set across the organization's scale. And the other thing is a proprietary ecosystem. We need to move away from these standalone systems that we've developed in-house and move into something where we can use that wider human capital that people are all creating these solutions with community collaboration. So this way, attackers won't be able to take this attack and use it on company X and then basically company Y the next day, company Z the next day. So this is a real challenge. So what does it look like today for an analyst? So again, we're talking about that analyst experience and why would there be problems for the analyst? Well, if you look at this flow, one of the things you'll notice with this flow is the amount of times that analysts have to leave tools to go into side conversations and sidebars. So you can imagine an analyst comes in, he arrives at his desk, and he goes, what am I going to work on? So he typically picks the highest priority issue that he has to work on. He looks at that issue, and then he starts an investigation. When he starts an investigation, he might go into his investigation tool. That might give him a piece of data that he then uses and goes into his next tool, and so on and so on. And he slowly builds up a picture of everything that's happening inside of his organization. Currently, we see about 8 tools. That's what this report says. I can tell you, I've done a lot of research in this space, and I've met SOCs where they have 20 tools deployed, huge number of tools. And inside those tools, while they may not use all of those tools, they may not configure all those tools, they're there. And what happens often with people working on blue teams and in SOCs is they're using out-of-band, I call it out-of-band communications. They might be using between those investigation tool 1 and investigation tool 2, what they might have is Notepad or Word docs that they're capturing information, copying and pasting. And then they might be emailing colleagues, all this type of stuff. And all this information just gets lost in the wind as the case goes on. So what it should look like, and this is where we get into this unified analyst experience stuff. One tool, one focal point, which captures all of the data, captures all the flow that people can showcase, share, exchange information, and overall speed up a case from opening and closing. And that's really, really important. And that unified analyst experience is really what we need to push into. So I've mentioned this unified analyst experience, and I've talked about AI. And the thing is with AI is great, but really we're trying to make it easier for the analyst. So what we don't want is we don't want AI that the analyst has to trigger, because why have them trigger it? Why not have the analyst look for it? So imagine, if you will, a world where you could turn around, the analyst comes into work, and the AI has worked in the background while he wasn't there. It's identified issues that need to be resolved. It's then automatically triggered based on this identification, some protection that needs to run. And then maybe it's also in the parallel. So the analyst hasn't had to manually run scans. It hasn't had to look up threat intel reports, type in IP addresses, and then run scans based off of lists of IP addresses. It's all happening in the background passively for them. And if it gets a hit, it's alerting them. We have the idea for detection where you can see the system is sitting there in the background watching flows of data, spotting anomalous behavior, letting the analyst know, hey, I've seen something. Is this something you should be concerned about? Without them having to crawl through acres of data to figure that out. Then we've got triage. Let's have analysts work on the issues that matter most at the time, right? So how do we pick, we've got a limited pool of human talent. How do they work on the stuff that matters most? And investigate, and I think investigate is a really, really powerful tool. With investigate, what we can do is we can look at a model, or we can look at a piece, an IOC, we can put it into a tool and then go, you know what, give me everything that happened that has a relationship with that piece of data. So I'm not copying and pasting through log files whenever to find it. And finally, when it comes to respond, let's have a way that we respond in a uniform way. And this is what generative AI, this is what a unified analyst experience can bring. So I think any conversation around generative AI and AI in general isn't complete without talking about the risks of generative AI. So if you're talking to any kind of provider in the generative AI space, what I want you thinking about is, okay, this is great, but how do I protect it? I want you thinking about that. Now, I'm an old red teamer. I started maybe 12 years ago as a red team, and my Bible at that time was probably the OWASP top 10. And for most, it probably still is. I really liked when OWASP brought out a top 10 for LLMs. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. So if you're sitting there thinking, you know what, I'm going to bring generative AI because I've seen this and it looks really, really cool. I'm going to bring this into my ecosystem. I'm going to start baking this into my life cycle. That's a really good thing to do, and you will see benefits. But if you do that without that kind of deeper understanding, and I'm very fortunate in IBM. I work with great people. I've got Ankur, who's my data scientist. And I list these people here because, you know, they're active on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in following people to understand what's going on, and they're worth tuning into. But when I look at how we're going to build and what we're going to build, I'm very fortunate that I can reach out to a data scientist and I can say, hey, Ankur, hey, Adam, who's our architect, and Jimmy, designer, I want to build this. Is this a good use case for generative AI? And we can explore that conversation. So if you're looking at doing something and you don't have someone to have that sounding board with, I would say reach out to us. You know, the best relationships happen with conversations, and we can talk to you about it. What's really, really cool with the work that we do with Jimmy is one of the things with generative AI, with its potential, is its potential to showcase data in new ways. And what we want to be able to do is when we do showcase that work, we want to be able to show it in a way that it builds trust. And trust is going to be a key point with generative AI. Building trust, showcasing it to the end user in a way that they know that this answer was produced. So all of those designs, all those ways. So don't just think about generative AI as something you're just going to throw in. You have to think about it in a way that works. That's why having it with guys like Adam as well are great to work with. So when we come to, again, it's generative AI and AI in general, when you're talking to someone, think of it as two sides of a coin. If someone is only talking to you about the AI for security piece and they're not talking about the security for AI piece, they're missing one very, very important part. So when we talk about the security for AI, and really this is just a trailer for what's coming next, I think in the next talk, Srini is going to go into an awful lot of detail in this portion of this slide. So if you're interested or curious in this, I'd say tune into the next talk. It'll be a really good one. So with security for AI, we're interested in how do we train the model? How do we secure that model? And then how do we make sure that model is used in the right way so it doesn't cause us any issues? Really, really important that you nail that down from the start. Otherwise, you risk having to unbake something later. So really, really cool. Definite talk to tune in with Srini. For the AI and security piece, I think when we came to look at AI, and we'll get into the use cases, we'll get into what we plan to build, what's all these things that are happening with AI and use cases that you should look for when you engage with providers. But when we talk about AI, generally speaking, and this will be a common narrative you'll hear from people, it's how do we speed people up? How do we lower costs? And how do we reduce friction? How do we make it so if I'm an analyst and I currently have to cut and paste things from 20 different files and how do I do that in a way that's seamless? So very, very important that our use cases lined up with that because they were our goals. When we look at how we can gauge, I guess, our own effectiveness, one of the things we wanted to do is this is where we kind of sit today. And you can see on that chart where the human sits. The human workload in the SOC and the analyst is really high. What that builds, obviously, if we don't crack that nut, what will happen is we'll end up getting burnout. So your rock stars, those go-to people, will be burned out, they'll leave. You'll end up with a problem. So we need to fix that. We need to keep those rock stars working effectively, keep that human in the loop, and build something more towards this. This is where the machine does more and the human sits there monitoring, making sure everything is okay. So with this, we like our top 10s in cybersecurity. I've already listed OWASP top 10 for one. I wanted to give you an idea of what top 10 use cases you should expect coming with generative AI that we can bring to supercharge that analyst experience and what they can leverage. So the first one I want to talk about is case summarization. I really, really like case summarization. So imagine you're in a SOC, and when you're in that SOC and you get a tap on the shoulder from a guy, your analyst, and he's like, you've been working a case for half an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, who knows? And you're clicking on that case, and someone goes, hey, what have you done? Imagine being able to just click a button, and up comes a full English explanation that you can now send to someone. Really, really powerful. This will save analysts a mountain of time in reporting, and also from an audit perspective, it could be really, really good. Also, even from a teaching, like with this particular use case, what you'll be able to do is you'll also say, I've sent all this data to about the case. It came back with this answer, and it's also given me back steps that I can do to resolve this case. Acts as a guide for people coming up through the SOC. Really, really cool. Next, target service subscription. One of the I think one of those churning jobs, those kind of wear you down kind of roles. When an analyst kind of goes through a system, it can find and it detects services. One of the things they often need to do for the reports is describe the services it detected. For many, this is a copy and paste operation. You could detect thousands of services running on different systems that you then need to expand. So a typical example of a service might be, I have something running on a Tomcat. What is Tomcat? I have to define what that is. So I've got a library of copy and paste that I can do. Generative AI, that can do that for us. It can do that very, very well. Next, I want to talk about alert prioritization. So with alert prioritization, this is about the triage. This is about making it faster. This is about working smarter. With generative AI, you can do this. You can figure this out. But I've put this in here not because it's generative AI. I've put this in because this is actually a perfect use case for machine learning. And this is one thing I want you guys to be aware of out there. Generative AI is really capturing the imaginations, and it's certainly become mainstream. It's an amazing technology. And that means there's this over-leaning towards generative AI. But with alert prioritization, it's a perfect use case for machine learning. So we have a long track record in IBM of delivering on machine learning. If you can look up on YouTube, I'm sure Watson and Jeopardy. So we have a long track record in doing this. And machine learning is very, very good at doing certain things. And just because generative AI has come along, doesn't mean we should forget everything we know about machine learning. Generative AI, compared cost-wise to machine learning, can be a little bit more expensive. So it's about finding that right balance. When we talk about AI, generally we mention it in the higher terms. We would have AI, machine learning, we might have deep learning, and then we would have generative AI. So getting that right mix of what you need is important. So I've put that there as a little bit of a ringer, just to raise a question of when you're talking to someone about what they can build and how you can build a solution. Working with a data scientist like Anchor, and again, this is why he was on there, having access to a data scientist can help you figure out your use case. Does it work? Is it the right technology to build? get your business plan right. Query generation, back into the generative AI place. So with query generation, one of the things we have, again, we're back in that place. I'm an analyst. I've got these tools. I'm burned out. I'm struggling. I want to know. There's a skills shortage, and we can look up that. There's lots of reports about how many hundreds of thousands of jobs there are in this space. It's quite startling. So with query generation, what we want to do is demystify some of that wizardry that some of the experts do, these heroes, by actually allowing people to put natural language into a system. So rather than going, I'll give a very simple example, select star from, maybe you might do in English, give me all of the IOCs. Now you don't need to know the machine language to make the tool work. You simply speak to the tool, which is fantastic. So threat advisory Q&A, this would be what, if you might hear a RAG use case, retrieve and augmented generation. You might hear this. What we want in this type of use case would be the ability for an analyst to start to probe questions of the system. So you imagine you've seen some threat intelligence. Imagine just being able to ask, am I affected by this? Is this something that is turning up on my network? Just a simple question like that. And the generative AI would know enough from that question to be able to drive into your systems, gather up all that data, and present the analyst back with the answer. Really, really powerful tool. In incident report generation, these again things that you can expect to happen. With incident report generation, what you might want to do, again, imagine you're the analyst, the CISO comes up and he goes, hey, what have you been working on this week? What have you worked on this month? What did the SOC produce? Imagine being able to just click a button and everything gets reported and sent on. Now imagine as well, it's to the same standard, so you don't have the case where Jason's not very good at documentation, but Paul is brilliant and Amy's excellent. You don't have that situation. You have one tone of voice. All the reports are coming out to this really high caliber, really high standard that can be used in your audit documentation and everything. Really lightens the workload of that kind of grinding effort that these very technical folks often don't enjoy doing. So next we've got search results summary. With search results summary, what's really, really cool for a threat analyst to be able to do is to perform a search and to be able to use the tool well to be able to find things. But we often don't talk about how hard it is to interpret the results that have come back. With search result summarization, what we can do is we can turn those kind of log files or whatever it is we've to return back into something that can be human readable, demystifying the result of a search. So on one hand, we're trying to sort out make it easy to ask a question of the system, and on the other, we're trying to make it easy to understand the answer, which is really, really cool. Command line explainer is another really useful tool. So you can imagine you're working in a SOC, you're an analyst, and you pick up in your logs all of these commands like that you have to filter and understand if they're dangerous. -P, -W, /R, who knows? All of these commands. Some of these command lines can be 6, 7, 8 lines long, daisy chained together. And analysts need to sit down and figure out what each one of those slashes and things do. Now, that's a very easy, straightforward case for I won't say easy, but very straightforward case for generative AI. When what we do is we upload all of the documentation into the tools, we pull back, and you can maybe ask a simple question. Is this something I need to be worried about? Is this a safe tool? Is this doing anything potentially destructive? We figure out those prompts we work on. That will absolutely speed analysts up. Next, we've got playbook generation. I really like playbook generation. The idea of being able to see an issue happen in your network and look at it, figure out what's going on, and then click a button, and then up comes the steps from that you need to do to solve this case. Absolutely brilliant. So that will enable is, hopefully what that will enable is that expert, that kind of rock star, we can spread their knowledge through the system. So junior members of teams can take advantage of that. They get a color by numbers approach. It will reduce human error because you're following lists of tasks to do. Much, much stronger. Absolutely brilliant. With threat intelligence summarization, one of the things we want to achieve with threat intelligence summarization is just the ability to kind of go in, get all of your information, figure it out, and put it in a context that matters for you. I think a lot of the times with our threat intelligence summarization, what we can see is it's very verbose, it's hard to consume. What we want to do is distill that down into the stuff that just matters for people. And that's, again, something that generative AI can do very, very well. So that's 10 use cases that I think if you're talking to someone about generative AI and what they're doing, that's 10 use cases. Now, everything that I've spoken to you about there and those 10, they're on our roadmap for our QRadar suite. So if they're interesting to you, we'd like to talk to you. So one of the things when we talk about AI is great. Automation, tying with automation is great. And I showed this slide earlier. But what I wanted to talk to there was basically list down some of the products and show that it lines up. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not a Curate R house, so that this doesn't apply. But with our new Curate R suite, and this is an important point I want to make, with our new Curate R suite, we can actually build upon current infrastructure. So you can imagine it's kind of take what you require. So if you go back a slide and you were to look at and go, right, I want something in identification, we can do stuff. So we can work with you and we can do some stuff. So some final thoughts I want you to kind of take on board when you're working with AI and you're considering going towards AI. If you're sitting down with someone, these are the questions you should lead with. You want to understand how that data model in the model is sourced. You really need to know that. So when we've seen in the past recently, like data that was sourced and that was driving the answers from models didn't come through good sources, and you end up having to unbake solutions, and it can become incredibly messy. So leading with that question will hopefully get you to a nice, safe place. Also understanding how the model got its answers. There's numerous examples, and actually Srini will go into details about how the models work in the talk following this. But understand how the model got its answers, I think, is really, really important. With the work that I do with Jimmy, and this is why I think adding a design component, not just a technical component, is so important. The work that I do with Jimmy, we spend time trying to figure out how can we show this generative AI in a way that builds trust. The one thing you want to do if you present generative AI to a user is not make it seem like it's come from a human. We want to keep the human in the loop, so the human can look at that answer, know that it's come from a tool, know that how it's calculated its answer, and then eventually approve it. Keep the human in the loop. Keep the intelligence there. Understand if you've got any control or influence on the model. I would call it maybe helping with the context or assisting the context when asking a question. So how can we, when I probe or what I do with a question, can I change? Can I do something? Can I tweak it? Can I tune it? Can I work on my prompts? And understand how Gen AI is accessed and represented. And that goes back to the point I was making with Jimmy. So a key question, and this I think is the real kind of hammer question is, are your models indemnified? That is a really key question. That's about making sure that where you move with your model, and if you go to the hassle of actually of changing your business processes, changing your business plans, putting all of this stuff in place, you want to make sure that that investment will see you through. And the best way to lead that question lead and figure that out is figuring out if the models are indemnified. It's certainly something we do. It's certainly something everyone should do. So it's something to do. For you. So that's really the talk for now. I think at this point we probably move into some questions from the audience, if there are any. So over to yourself.
Hey, so we've got a few. So one, can these new AI case summarization tools be used to speed up incident reporting for the recently updated federal cybersecurity guidelines?
So yes, the answer is absolutely yes. So what's really, really cool with the case summarization is how our models are working and what we do in the back end. So with our models in particular, what we do is we train those models on what we call piles, right? So those guidelines would become part of that pile, and that pile we would use. So if it needed to be in a particular way or a particular shape or whatever, we would put that data into that system, which would mean that the reports that were being generated or the summaries that were coming out would be totally in line with what you need. Another thing that happens when the creation of cases, and this is something that I think Anchor does such a fantastic job and his team do, is on the prompt engineering. So a lot of people talk about the training, and then they don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the prompt engineering. It's very important how you ask the question to the model to get the answer that you want out of it. So between a combination of the prompt engineering, the payloads that we train the data on, we can produce pretty much anything. Yeah, it's very, very powerful.
All right, and then what types of platforms should I be storing my security data in so that I can feed it into these new AI tools?
So in terms of platforms,
storing logs, user accounts, permissions.
Yeah. So it depends on honestly, it depends on what type of data you want to search for. The question's a bit generic, to be honest with you, in terms of what types of platforms. But like if we look at what we're doing in ours, we would do for our models and how we do queries. So the model you train on the data set. So that data set might be a list of correct answers, let's call it, or example cases that you want to see, or example alerts, or whatever it might be. And then what we do is, through prompt engineering, you might say, given this log information, let's take log information for an example, given this log information, I want you to produce an output that looks like this. So we would explore through prompt engineering, given this flow, and we know what an expected answer would be. And we might only need to do this 20, 30, 40 times, and we'd start to get really, really close to what the expected output should be. So if it's what type of platforms and data that we would use, from whatever, it depends on the use case, really. I know that's probably not specific enough for the person, but that's really is it.
All right, and then one more. How do I start baking AI into my security operation process today?
That is a great question. So how do you start baking it in? If you look at our own journey, one of the things that we did in IBM was we looked at, and all of those cases that I showed you are on a roadmap. And again, I'd say if you're interested or any of those have taken, you've taken some interest in, we are openly talking to people out there about them in gaining feedback. So how we started on our journey was we looked at where are the analysts, say, spending most of their time. From there, we're very fortunate. We've got Watson X, which is a fantastic tool that allows us to start to run these queries and do all the training. So what we were able to do with our solution was when we came to choose our solution, where will we start? We're like, right, where do the analysts spend their most time? Where's the most frustration? What is actually achievable? And that's a really key point. Like if you have a SOC with loads of things and you want to get generative AI, once you crack the nut on building it, you can start rolling out because they become simplified cases. So with us, what we did was we went, right, let's go for case summarization. This is a really strong case. This is real benefits to the user. This is where they sink an awful lot of their time into. So with that, what we did was we got an awful lot of cases where, again, I'm very, very fortunate. I work in IBM. We have access to lots and lots of material. So with that training data, but that could be your own SOCs could provide that data. With that data, what we were able to do was start pushing that into our Watson system, see what our results should look like, and then we were starting to retrofit it back into our tool. So actually, if you're downstairs today, I know this is online, but if you're downstairs today, I've got a couple of guys at the stand, and we could actually show some early stuff that we could present to show where we're going. Yep.
Right.
Yep. So I think we're done. It's questions? Okay, so with that, I think I'll leave it there. So thanks very much. I'm Jace Flood. That was generative AI and SecOps. So I hope you enjoyed it.